Right, some of you know me, some of you don't. My name is Nick Woodyatt. I'm now an independent soil life advisor, and I'm back basically because Karen's been telling everybody that I seem to know what I'm on about. Yeah. I'm going to spend 10 minutes. No, I'm not. I'm going to because it's a bit tight for time because nobody could shut Nick up. I will keep it tight, so I will spend 5 minutes on my soapbox to start with. But today's targets are to understand the decisions are yours, that is one of my major things, which I try and get across to people. Still, I've been trying to do this for a long time, and I still think it's immensely important. Know what it's meant by living soil and the part carbon plays. It's a carbon meeting. We're here to talk about carbon. Even understanding your own farm is talking about carbon. How we can take back the carbon from the air to help our soils. Obviously, now that we've got the Donald and Mr. Farage saying that climate change isn't happening, it's not quite so as important. Why do we say Farage? We don't say we're putting the car in the garage. Very odd. But anyway, I suppose the point is that this country only puts 1% of the world carbon in the air. So you do have to ask the question why our governments, successive governments, are attacking us so greatly and so costly when we're doing so little compared with the big countries. And I hate to think where the states are going now. We need to know what a living soil can do for you to put money on your bank. Forget the fact that farmers can save the world from climate change, which you can. However, that's not the angle I come from. I come from the angle that if you get the carbon right, if we start to look at it, you put the money back on your bank account. And understanding the meaning of nutrient availability. We do bang on an awful lot about balance, but if the plants can't get it or enough of it out of the soil, you're always on the back foot. That's my back garden, or at least it was about 10 days ago. You can't, yeah, we are on a floodplain. I haven't left the tap on. The river is that far line over there. That's the river. This is what we call the Ham. It's a floodplain, and that bit there is the bottom third of our garden. The important thing to notice here is the colour. When the Severn, which is what that is over there, floods on its own, it looks like what it is, an open sewer. I don't object to this. Of course, we need all the money for the foreign investors, bless them. We don't want to tidy it up, do we? But this is more important because it's red. I know it's not a very good photograph, but you take it from me, that is bright orange. And I think Nick alluded to this morning because that's all from the team, all from Hereford, bless them. They send all their soil down the river and down there. We're fairly new at this house, but that's a vegetable pot there, and I chucked loads of potatoes in it last year. It was rough old subsoil. I thought nothing's going to grow in it. Chucked some spuds in it. You should have seen them. They were like the triffids, purely because all the nutrition in this water went into that. If you phoned those farmers up, and any farmer that has bare soil in the winter and said, right, somebody has hacked your bank account and they're taking money out of it, they'd go mental. No difference. Absolutely no difference. Their future, their profit, their money is flowing down the river. So it's an important point. That's Upton. We have posh ducks there, so sod Oxford. Yes, we do have some strange visitors. I've been about a bit. This was in Kenya. That was my first, as I come out of Nairobi, came round a big sweeping bend, and that was my first view of the Rift Valley. I was so excited, I really was. I couldn't believe it. And mainly what I couldn't believe is at this end of the Rift Valley, when you look, you've got the windows open, you're looking out, the pollution is so bad that your eyes are streaming, you can hardly breathe. It's heartbreaking. And I was there as an advisor for their growing the food for us. And roses. Lake Navasha is so polluted now, it's unbelievable, just because it's next to several huge rose-growing organisations that is all sending it over to us in other parts of Northern Europe. It is so sad to see. And I thought I'd show you that's a sort of a level of technology. Although I've got to be honest, if I had a farm, I'd quite fancy that. No glass houses, just polytunnels. There was roses in the middle, coffee to one side, tea to the other. And again, the interesting thing now is I was asked to go on to a tea plantation in Uganda because they couldn't work out what was wrong with it. All of the roots were on the subsoil. All the topsoil had gone, all washed out. So they've done a really good job of what Hereford is doing at the moment. And look at the soil. I mean, it is stunningly good soil, or at least it was. But I thought I'd show you these because it's these people who are growing our food for us. I was going around huge farms, 7-foot fences with barbed wire on the top, so that the poor and the people who are starving to death couldn't get in, and they're taking that food and bringing it over here. And yet we seem to be pushing farmers away from making food into growing fields of flowers and rewilding and all sorts of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, we need to bear that in mind, and we need to tell the powers that be what the hell is going on. When it rains there, again, terrible photograph because that's bright red. It shouldn't be that colour. But it gives you some idea of what these people are living in. They got no food, not a lot of hope, to be perfectly honest. All their soil's washing away, and they're growing food for us, and we throw it away. That was an interesting one. We were driving down the road, and I had the window open. I'm like a kid. I said, I mean, it's zebras. And my driver, Mo Manny, said, oh, you like zebras? I went, yeah. I said, brilliant. See them out in the wild running along. So we had a zebra steak for lunch. It was lovely. Not quite sure he had understood what I was on about. It's your farm. When I first started growing, bear in mind I did start in horticulture, but I worked on a farm as well in Ombersley. Again, red soil, beautiful stuff, bit sandy, but if you treated it well, and the farmer had it absolutely humming. He didn't have an agronomist. He merely had people come in and said, oh, this is available, that's available. He read up on it, he took notice, and then he decided on what to use. And that's what we've got to get back to. Now, I don't know if, well, obviously there are, Aiva and Edifos and various other people. This comes from two ways. Bearing in mind, my first half of my career was growing stuff. I'm a seedsman, and I can grow plants. I could grow seeds on that floor. The second half was a salesman. I was very successful as a salesman, so I know from where I'm coming, how it works. If a salesman comes onto your farm, he wants to sell you as much as he possibly can, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's his job. No, nothing wrong with that at all. Where we've gone wrong is farmers have lost the ability to decide on, do I need it? It's not difficult. My old boss, I mean, if somebody he'd have said, oh, you need this, and it just appeared the day after, he'd have shoved it where the sun doesn't shine. Wales. He made his own decisions. You've got to get back to that. Now, the agronomists in the room said, what's he on about? There's an opportunity here for you as well. This industry is at a crossroads at the moment. We're in a very, very dangerous place. The weather doesn't like us. The public doesn't like us. And we won't really go into the politicians because they positively hate us. So we've all got to work together as a team. So it's no good just selling as much as we can for as much as we can, which is their mantra. We've got to take everybody forward to survive. That used to be how I was seen, looking at regen farming. The old snake oil, no, it's the other way around. It was the chemicals with the snake oil, and we've been on a massive experiment for the past 30 or 40 years. We've burnt out all the carbon from our soil. We now need to look at a different way of doing things. Again, not attacking the way. We did what we were supposed to do. Now we've got to find another way. Just try and remember that everybody on the farm has a different agenda from you. And Reeves isn't the only one after your pound. Look after them. Have a thought process. What can I do to reduce the risk of pest and disease? Biggest one on that is nitrogen management. If you have a good nitrogen management policy on the farm, what you use, when you use it, the number of occasions you put it on, you always put it on, and I will come back to this several times, you always put it on with a carbon source, back to the carbon, always comes back to the carbon. If you get the management of the nitrogen right, you've done 2/3 of what you need to do. The other third is putting everything with it to make sure it works. Don't ever put one nutrient on its own. Doesn't do it. Everything has to be, it's all part. Even I am a bugger for saying, oh, this is vital, that's a vital. They all are. From the smallest amount, what's the smallest amount? Molybdenum. That's probably the smallest in the soil, or even nickel, which is even smaller. Tiniest, in fact, nickel, we look at parts per billion. And yet, it's one of the best fungicides that you can put into the plant from the root. This is huge in Poland. I know a Polish strawberry grower. He always comes back from holiday with 2 5 litres of nickel in his bag. Of course, doesn't get checked at the airport. When I lived in New Zealand, you couldn't get a bloody apple in there, let alone 2 5 litres of containers, but that's how he does it. But he knows it works. So you find out how you can feed your crop so you don't get pest and disease. You also have to ask a question, when I got a pest and disease, why? Don't just charge in with either a chemical, or if on Tim's farm and other farms, when I say it is possible to grow without fungicides, you get something, no it isn't. Yes it is, we do it. You've got to want to do it, and it's bloody difficult. But it is possible. But even there, if you've got a problem, why? And you go through, you look at your varieties, you look at your soil, you look at what you've done, you work out why you've got it to stop it the next time. Remember a young man several years ago phoned me up, and he was out in his wheat crop, late spring, and he said, my chemicals chap said I should spray for septoria. And of course, as per usual, same with every year, and it'll be the same this year, been in the Farmers Weekly, oh, it's going to be every year for septoria. He said, should I do it? I said, nothing to do with me. It's your farm. I said, I'll tell you, I'll give some pointers, but you've got to make decisions. I said, so what you've got to decide is the crop wet? He said, no, it ain't, bone dry, right? Get down on your hands and knees, look at the trash at the bottom. Is that wet? No, it isn't, that's bone dry. Is there any septoria about? I said, oh, there's some tiny bits down the bottom, but nothing to speak of. What's the weather forecast? He said, oh, sunshine, we haven't had any rain for ages, and we haven't had anything. In fact, I could do with some rain, but he said, there's none forecast. I said, so it's dry in the bottom, no rain forecast. What do you think is the chances of getting septoria? He went, I don't need it, do I? And yet, he was ready to go out and spray because the person selling the spray for the septoria said he needed to. So he made the decision. The other person would have sold plenty of other stuff, and again, not attacking salesmen. I can't. I've done too much of that. So why is an immensely important question. When I started work as a nursery manager in 1979, before quite a lot of you were born, that's why I'm retired, you know. When I started there, my boss got absolutely livid because I kept saying why. I wasn't being bloody awkward, I wanted to learn. And I still see him now, he was in our house a fortnight ago and we still talk about it. And he said it took him months to realise it was a valid question. And then he said it took him another few months to realise that his answers weren't acceptable. Because when I said, why are you doing this? Most of the time it was because my dad did it. And that's in the same way as if you're saying why I'm doing it, because it says so on my piece of paper I got in January, it's not acceptable. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. It might be the right thing to do. But you look at the chemical, you look at what it's going to do, and a bit like taking paracetamol or anything like that, you need to know what the side effects are and whether you're willing to have the side effects, because that's no difference. I was talking to a friend at the end of last week on Friday. I was having my breakfast in a cafe, which is my hobby, and his ex-wife, as it happens, just been an ex-wife, she is a rep for a chemical company that supplies the drugs to the doctors. And he said the year before last, their meeting was in Mauritius and they took 40 doctors with them. Ever wondered why they're all trying to get you on to statins? So why am I doing this? Immensely important. If you only take one thing home, that's it. And it is still tied in with carbon, because why should have that carbon there somewhere? Carbon soils is going to be a living soil. This is what we used to have before bagged nitrogen turned up. It is my belief that the major problem with our soils And the reason we're in the situation we are at the moment, with soils disappearing off the usable spectrum, is bagged nitrogen, not the plough. Now, I'm not defending overploughing, and I'm certainly not defending deep ploughing. I mean, to plough I've been in Norfolk where they deep plough to the point where it looks like they've got toothpaste on the top of the field. It comes up in a roll, and they just bring all the subsoil on the top. I mean, that's just ludicrous. But it's not the plough per se. It's how they do it. And also, it's bagged nitrogen that has burned all your nitrogen out. And that's why that your father and your grandfather used a lot less nitrogen than you did. Because when a molecule of nitrogen goes into a plant, it should take 15 to 20 molecules of carbon with it. And if it doesn't, it starts to change. And this is the problem. It starts to change because the plant starts to take in an excess of NO3 rather than NH4. A plant is designed that 2/3 of what it takes in should be NH4, 1/3 NO3. And now we've converted it to 90% NO3, we've actually changed the DNA of the bacteria in the root zone. That's how clever we've been. Although, unfortunately, it isn't clever. It's destroyed us, because what we do then is we take in an excess of NO3 into the plant, into the sap, into the leaf, and that is the mother's milk to pest and disease. And hey, lo and behold, what do we need? Fungicide. Fits in with the system that we've been forced down. We need to step back, and we need to start saying, right, how can I change it so that we start increasing the life in the soil? All of this is working for you, with the exception possibly of a slug. They are breaking down organic matter into organic carbon. And again, yes, you picked up this morning from Nick, you get carbon in different forms. What we're trying to get is long chain carbon, because it lasts for an awful long time. Short chain carbon burns off quickly. I had a farmer in Newark, every year, every autumn, used to put compost in, used to move around, put compost on his soil, bright red soil, put the compost on it. By the sort of late spring, early summer, the soil had actually gone dark. You could see he'd visibly had an effect. And yet by October, it had gone back to red again. All disappeared. Purely because his pH was too high. He had his near 7.88. And basically, he had an explosion of bacteria, and all the organic matter that he put on was just eaten up and volatilized off back into the air. It's no good up here. And again, this is, nothing to do with climate change or anything, but you've got all this carbon up here and all the nitrogen, and we've got to bring those back into the soil, because they work for you and they give you, it's for free. And if you can get that, you'll get stronger plants, and you don't have then to use the fungicides. The plants are designed for this to be here. I was at the rather grandly named first symposium of regenerative growing in Strasbourg 15 years ago. And the University of California had some slides up. I wish I could get them. And it showed you an agar dish, line of seeds across, and the radical coming out of the seed, as you'd expect. The next slide was exactly the same, but at the bottom there was another little dish, so it wasn't touching that jelly, of active Bacillus subtilis. And the radical came down, branched, and was covered in root hair in the same time. The second thing they did is they put the seeds at the mouth of a small plastic maze, and at the other end, active Bacillus subtilis. And the root that went through the maze did not deviate. It went straight through the maze, straight out to the Bacillus subtilis. The plant accepts it to be there. It throws anywhere between 50 and 60% of its sugars that it produces into the soil to feed all of this, so that it can then take up the nutrients that it finds it difficult to take up the rest of the time. Again, then you've got the balance. This is aimed at somebody specific, although no names, no pack drill. If anyone says the microbial life isn't important, get them off the farm. If you're a salesman or an agronomist that you don't believe in it, start reading up. Look at the microbiome. Look at all the work that's done on it. Science is way past you. We know that this is how it should be. We know that a profitable farm should be like this. This is a book I was lent by a friend of mine. His daughter was, I can't think it was A-levels or she's at university. But if anybody doubts the science behind microbial life, have a look at this. It's a bit heavy going, I've got to be honest, but it's stunning. There was one part in it, or a lot of this is for the human microbiome, as again, an animal microbiome rather than the soil, but it's all part of one. We're all the same organism. They've actually got and I can't actually remember, but I think it was the tsetse fly, which gives us a disease, which I'm buggered if I remember what it's called now. Dengue fever, that's the one. They can now take the microbiome from this fly, change it, put it back so that it can't spread dengue fever around. That blows me away. The fact that we can do something like that. And funny enough, there's the reason I don't like organic growing. Human beings, ooh, that was, ooh, dodgy, yeah. No. The human race can be amazing. We've put man on the moon. In fact, I can think of a couple more I'd like to put up there, but we are, look at some of the IT, look at what we can do. It is absolutely stunning. Why would we want to cut ourselves off from the stunning bit? Whereas, yes, on the other hand, we are evil. We're destroying our own planet. We're destroying our own selves. We don't seem to be able to spot scams quick enough. Oh, we're awful. But I still personally, from a growing point of view, I want to be able to get hold of the good stuff. When it comes to MOP, triple superphosphate, they have done so much damage to our soils, I wouldn't use them. I like the phrase, does nature object? And if it does, don't use it. But to say I'm not going to use something because it's man-made, anyway, that's me. 80% of the life on this planet is microbial. 80% of that microbial life is under our feet. Well, not now possibly, but certainly on your farms it is. And it's there, it's working for you. It is a most vital factor to successful farming and a healthy life. I say this at each one, and he hasn't objected to it yet. I, amongst many, didn't think we would see Tim back and firing on all his cylinders by now. And yet, he bounced back so quickly. Now, for those that know Mrs. Tim, who is an amazing woman and has shown herself to be an amazing woman, only feeds him whole foods and the good stuff. Always did. This was before the accident. Only ever ate the good stuff. He'll tell you the reason why. But because he only ate the good stuff and not processed food, he has bounced so quick. And I, for one, I put my hands up. I still believed he'd be in hospital now, let alone trolling around with me. So, which is brilliant, but it just shows you. Get the right food in, be healthy. It's amazing what you can do. Very quickly, because we won't get through now, 'cause I know I'm short of time. Bacteria have been in charge of this planet for most of its life. It's only human beings have decided that we know better than it does. To be fair, it doesn't know we're here. And if it did suddenly change in any way, it could just wipe us out like that and it wouldn't even know. But if you can, work with nature, because quite frankly, it knows far more than we do. Carbon in the soil is carbon, don't forget. In many soils, carbon is the main source of food for the microbial life. It lives in the humic element of the soil, the human fraction, I'll get it right in a minute. It lives in the humic fraction of the soil and it eats it. It eats its own house, which is brilliant. It eats carbon. And when it does that, it exudes various substances, biofilm, glomulin from fungi, and the humic acids do tend to glue the soil particles together. So you end up with this. You end up with the soil stuck to the root. That's what you're looking for in a healthy soil, because that means then that you're not expecting the water molecules and the nutrient molecules to jump over empty space into the root. They don't like doing that. Well, they can't. So basically, this is what you're looking for, the green bridge. By doing that, you are greatly increasing the efficacy of the plant taking up water and nutrients. In the same way as there's lots of little tricks. You've heard of humic acid. I don't know if you know, but humic acid actually, I know it sounds strange and I don't understand this one, but it takes the water molecules and lines them all up in the same way. All of them positives facing the same way, so it goes into the plant easier. Nature's done that for you. God knows how, but it works. So we have to question, why do we keep destroying this system? Well, we destroy it because we keep getting given misinformation. I'm not saying I'm giving you the correct information. I'm saying I'm giving you things to think about that go off to read. A lot of people will say that I am Tim's agronomist, which isn't entirely true. It is to a degree, but it isn't, because I would go in and say, I think we should do so-and-so. He'd bog off and spend all night reading about it. And then the next time I'd see him, he'd looked it up and he will have taken that on board and decide what to do. Or he'll say, oh, I've heard of wood vinegar. What do you think of this? Wood what? So I have to go away and read. This is what I say to salesmen and agronomists. It's a two-way process. The one thing I will say at Tim's is it's never been the blame game. If you're a farmer, and nothing wrong with your farm, I mean, even if you want to walk out of here and go and use the maximum amount of chemicals you want, that's your farm. But the same is, if you don't want to go down that route and you want to put some of that money back onto your account to invest in what you want to invest in, you can't play the blame game. Because if something goes wrong and you want to sack your agronomist, then your agronomist will use everything known to man to stop that happening. He will use belt and braces and a huge amount of money. Whereas with Tim and I mean, we've been in crops where even I have said, do you know, I think we might have to run through with a bit of TEB. No, we won't. So we've been through with a nutritional spray, silica, and wood vinegar, and the yellow rust in the septoria. Poof. But he was willing to take the chance. His farm, his soil, he took the chance. It could have gone wrong, and he wouldn't have sacked me. Although I wish he would. Soil carbon, this was on the wall at school, for Christ's sake. This is what we do. It is so important. This should be imprinted on your brains. Plants absorb carbon dioxide via photosynthesis. Hands up. When was the last time anybody discussed photosynthesis with their agronomist? Anybody discussed it at all? Yeah, I know you have. You have. Well done. No, I wouldn't do you. I aim at the back. Yeah, I know we have, but one person. Photosynthesis. Well, yeah, you've discussed it with me, I know. Photosynthesis. Everything, that carbon that was spoken about, everything comes from photosynthesis. The Industrial Revolution, everything we're wearing, everything Nick said this morning, everything came from photosynthesis. Look at it, understand it, what you can do to increase it, which we'll look at in a second. Use the carbon to build organic compounds for plant and growth. That's what we're doing. I mean, that's yield. Basically, that statement there is yield. You've got to get it right. Roots take up water and nutrients in partnerships with soil organisms. Copper and zinc really hate going into the plant without fungal help. So you need it all there. I won't go through all of this, just keep going on, but this is so important because without getting this right, you don't have all that. And without all that, you don't have healthy this. And without healthy this, you don't have healthy them, without sticking things into them. So it really is important that you get that right. I'm just thinking where we are. No, it's all right. We don't know where this is. I find that is, you can basically, it just looks like crude oil being spread on. This is digestate from a digester using human waste. There's so much salt in it. The worms, I was following that, and honestly, with my hanky over my mouth, because you can't breathe, the worms were just shooting out of the ground and were dead in seconds. How can that? Bearing in mind how important worms are for you. They are your best friend. You should have 27 in every spadeful. Everything else should be there, but worms are most important. When the soil goes down the length of that worm and through that gut there, by the time it poops out the other end, it's got between 7 and 11 times more nutrients. That soil's got between 7 and 11 times the nutrient it had when it went in the front end. I'm saying that as if I know which is front and back, but we'll just pretend it like Actually, I think it's the other way around. That's the front, that's the back. So they put tunnels down in the ground that roots can follow, that water can follow. They break things up. They take organic matter down. Why on earth you would kill those beats me. Anything you do that harms the worms should be illegal, in my opinion. I've got to be honest, I keep trying to think of something funny to say to this, but I don't. I mean, again, this is Hereford. There's a red soil, or what's left of it. The rest of it's in my garden. Quite frankly, I mean, I'd say, what can you say? If just from a soil point of view, that's a disgrace. Let alone the poor bloody animals. But the point of view is that if you put sheep, even for years, for a long time, I said sheep. It was best to take a cover crop off by sheep. And yet, if you put the sheep out on a cover crop and that soil's a little bit wet, you can lose a ton off yield. God knows what well, that's going to be ploughed, isn't it? That's the only answer to that. Photosynthesis. The big five, used to be the big four, but it's only because I think they forgot the silicon. I will come back to these in a second. What time am I now? The big five: calcium, boron, magnesium, phosphorus and silicon. Now, the clever amongst you, which is all of you, should be saying, well, hang on, magnesium's the only one really in photosynthesis because it's in the middle, and that is correct. However, all of these are energy and what the plant is made of. So these, if you're going to get increased photosynthesis, these all need to be on the high level of your leaf test. Not soil test, leaf test. Soil tests, immensely useful for seeing out if you need to change things, if you want to look at what you're doing. But really and truly, leaf test stroke sap test, if you've got the patience to do sap tests, I haven't, this is where you need to see them because it shows you what's happening in the plant today. The sap test shows you what's happening in the plant immediately, whereas a leaf test tends to tell you what's a few days ago, but nonetheless, all of these should be in the medium to high range. I'll come to reason why in a minute. But those are the sort of things that you need to be concentrating on to get the photosynthesis up. Boy, I can grow things. Calm down. It's a cucumber. All crops will respond to the way you grow them. So you overdo the N. If you're a farmer that wants to go and put out 200, 250 kilograms of N at the end of February, you will weaken the plant. You will have nutritionally weak food. Where were we going last week? Oh, it's Kent. And we went past and the farmer was going out with nitrogen. Why? What's it going to do? Other than rot his bloody fields up? Absolutely nothing. So everything needs to be sorted out so that it's all in balance, all at the right time. And then you get it right. It was a fat bugger, this was. Look at that. When he grows tomatoes, he can sit in his glass house and eat until they comes out of his ears. When I get a bag of tomatoes from the supermarket, I instantly get mouth ulcers. I can't eat them. They're just full of nitrates. If I grow a cucumber, and yes, I admit that is a tad big. If I chop the end off that and put it in the fridge and take one from a supermarket and chop the end off, put it in the fridge, the following day, that one just dries up a little bit. Whereas the one from the supermarket goes manky because it's full of nitrates. And then you're wondering why you're ill all the time because of the way it's grown. I used to, more often than not, especially in New Zealand, I used to go in, I was looking after quite a few tomato growers. I'd go in there and they'd say, would you like some tomatoes? I said, oh, no, I'm fine, thank you. And they'd go, oh, it's all right, we grow our tomatoes round the back. They didn't even eat what they grew. So if you want to improve the soil, basically everything I'm talking about is carbon. I'm not going off the story. Everything is down to carbon. Even growing that veg properly is carbon, having the right amount of carbon to nitrogen, 1 to 15 to 20. Improving the soil, use a carbon source with every fertilizer application. That is a given. Nick said that this morning. You've got your nurture N from Aiva at 2%. Amazing. If you're using granular N, all you have to do is put the nurture N with your next foliar onto the soil. Does the same thing. So it's got to be there. You've got to start to look at building up the carbon humic fraction in your soil. Don't kill cellulose digesting fungi. The number of times you can go onto a field where and you put your fork in, not your spade, it chops worms in hand.
You're listening, aren't you?
Yes, I used to get told off, you can't use a spade, you chop my worms up. So use your fork, put your fork in, turn them over. And if you can find stubble that is glossy and black, you've then found a sign that you have not got a living soil, because there is no digesting fungi in your soil. Whereas, if you can go through and in a few months, matter of 2 or 3 months after Tim halves it, it's gone. It's all gone. It's all broken down. It goes into the soil. You can cheat. Again, I thought I'd throw this in for Aiva. You can cheat. You can buy the cellulose breaking bacteria, which is called, I can't remember. Oh, you know it's bloody digest. What's the name of the bacteria? Bacillus. No, I can't remember that either. But anyway, there is a product there that it's only 20 grams per hectare. You put it on, and Tim is actually on the website. See? See? You've got a long way to go, Nick. There's a video online of Tim. It had been put onto the ground. I'm not sure if it was a brood or somewhere else, but he was actually, and he's breaking it up, and it's just as if it's turned to glass. No chemical will do that. And of course, breaks up, goes in the soil, then all the soil life, and especially the worms, take it down, and bingo. If you've been using fungicides, it won't break down, so you need to do something. Stop using fungicide to be the first, but if you've used fungicide, it was your choice to use fungicide, then you need to understand that it's not going to break down until you do something about it. Examine the tillage to increase porosity. If you've got soil like this, it's not going to work, especially if you've got a direct drill. Last autumn, watched a horse avatar, went out on the ground, it was too wet. There's reasons for it, I'm not blaming the person who did it, strangely enough. There was a shortage of time, but rather than patients being allowed to be used, it couldn't. Opened up the V. The avatar, if you're not careful, if it's too wet, then avatar and several of the other drills will polish the sides of the V, which is what it did. So basically you had a polished V, which it then shut up, and then it rained. So of course, what did the grass do? It didn't grow. It can't grow in that wet. So you've got to look at the porosity of your soil. Seeds need air. Roots need air. If you haven't got any air going into your soil, you can't get the carbon and the nitrogen. There's 75,000 tons of nitrogen over every hectare. You can use that, but only if it can get into the soil. The air should go into the soil. That soil life you saw breathes it in. They breathe it out as carbon dioxide. It comes back up and into the plant. Why do you think stomata on the undersides of the leaves, or at least of broadleaf plants? Wheats and grasses, there's 50-50 because they're straight up. But all broadleaf plants is there on the underneath. So they're designed, nature's done this for you. Goes in, converts, comes up into the plant. Bob's your uncle. Apart from hydrangeas, they're all on the top. Nobody knows why. Don't be frightened of a bit of tillage. This is probably one of the few places where Tim and I do occasionally disagree. Because I'll be walking across, Christ, I absolutely adore a low disturbance lifter. I think it's a wonderful piece of kit. But, has to be right, you've got to be able to use it in the right place. To be fair to Tim, he always generally wins because he's got the patience to wait until the soil's just right. So when his 758 goes through the soil, it breaks it up. So I can't really argue. In the same way, when you put compost under the soil, compost, brilliant. For Christ's sake, turn it in. If you put it on the top, it just, all the good stuff, certainly the nitrogen, the sulfur, and the carbon, volatilize off. So if you can just turn it in or fill it into the top, you're going to get far more out of that compost than just leaving it on the top. But of course, they've changed the rules now, so you can only put it on in the spring, so it's going to sit there and no bleeding use. There's some very strange rules. It's a bit like, it's if you use cattle in a, there's a few cattle move around in this system, I can't think of the word, mob grazing. I only looked at Tim then, I knew it, he was in there. if you're using cattle mob grazing and then you move them on, I don't understand why we can't just put a set of chains on the back of a quad bike and go around and move the muck about. No, it's against the rules. It's against SFI rules because it might upset ground nesting birds. There's been 200 cows in there, for fuck's sake. How can there be any ground nesting birds? And yet, if you spread that muck all over the place and it's still got all that moisture into it, an awful lot more goes into the soil and you don't get those chunks of grass all over the place. Compost and compost brewing. This is a big one. Again, listen to you, especially you younger people, although everybody younger than to me. You need to understand composting like the Victorians do it. Go and look at the Compost King on the TV. He's worth it just to listen to him with his rummy accent. He's brilliant at composting. You need to understand this because sooner or later, the big guys are going to have everything registered and you're going to go from things like Bacillus subtilis at £5 a hectare up to £30 a hectare. If you brew on your farm, and if you make a compost heap and you then brew that, it's going to be an awful lot cheaper. You're looking at £1 a hectare with all the work involved and the feed involved. So it's going to be a lot less. But also, blast, I lost my bloody thread then. It's funny how that can happen, isn't it? So if you brew it up, they can't come and take it off you because it's yours. It's your bacteria, your fungi from your farm. Your soils know how to deal with it. It isn't from another country or another part. If you've had stuff from up north, they just might not recognise it. So learn how to do that. That's so important. If you just take that one home with you, that's immensely important. So you increase the soil life that works for you, build organic carbon, those are exactly the same thing. Look at cover crops. Tim produced a wonderful farm at Brood. The soil, you could piss down a rain and there was no puddles. When the sun turned out, it held onto the moisture a lot longer. It was lovely, and it was only cover crops that did that. I went onto a farm in Doncaster in January, and I was there, and there's a farmer, he loved this stuff. He was a bit like Tim, he loved all this sort of stuff, and he had all the kit. He had a microscope with a camera on so you could see there. And I said, oh, what you been up to? He said, oh, I've been out to do a microbial check. This is in the middle of February in Doncaster, and it was freezing. I said, well, that was a waste of bloody time, surely. And he went, ah. So he showed me the first slide, which was from under his wheat crop. Nothing. I said, well, there you go. He said, have a look at this. This is from 500 mil down under a winter cover crop. And honestly, it looked like spring. There were bloody bacteria bouncing around, and you could see the fungi branching. So you can keep your soils alive. So just see the advantage of companion crops and cover crops for the multitude of things that it can do for you. Remove or not remove straw. Be careful when you start regen farming because, a bit like Tim's, we found that the cover crop started to bring the excess potassium that was on the farm up. So now, luckily, he grows grass for haylage, so we can take all that off, and we're taking all the straw off for a muck for straw deal. So sometimes it's worth taking stuff off. Sometimes it isn't. It's worth treating it with digesting fungi and put it in. So again, depending on what you want to do. That's what it looks like when it's breaking down. That I'm pretty sure by the look of the thickness and the whiteness, I would suggest that's a trichoderma. Look at this plant's hardly got going, and yet you can see the nodules starting to form. This shows the manganese and magnesium are there for that. I would suggest that's might just starting to show a bit of pink as well, or so that shows that they're cobalt. If you've got those and they're not pink, you're short of cobalt. And if they're not pink, your legume crop is going to be taking nitrogen from you in no uncertain terms. I've been onto fields where they've got it wrong. The substory of clover has completely obliterated the wheat crop because it was taking all the N and not producing any, just for want of a bit of cobalt. Most important job on the farm is nitrogen management. I've told you that. We don't need to go there again. They protect from rain erosion, unless you want to put all your soil in my garden, which is fine. But if you want to stop that, it goes a decrease in leaching. There's two things. A, it holds the nutrients in place. And also, if you increase the humic level in the soil, because they can hold plus and minus, cations and anions, it stops leaching. So you have a two-pronged attack to decrease the amount of fertilizer that you're losing. Huge root mass. When that root mass dies, when you crimp at the end of the day or take it off, that root dies and it opens up passageways for the new roots to go down, as well as offering nutrients to the plant. So they're actually going down tunnels that are full of food. So you get a nutrient buildup in biomass. Be a little bit careful on that. I had one farmer where he was told he had 278 kilograms of N per hectare, and his nutritionist said, oh, you don't need to put any N on this year. Well, of course, it's total crop failure. It doesn't work like that. When the N builds up like that for a start, a lot of it will volatilise off when it's broken down. Some of it will go in and lock up. So if you've got if I'd have been there, that 270, I'd have probably said, well, we'll reduce the amount of N by about 30% at the most. So be careful. Don't just, when they send you, when you've had your square metre and your cover crop, don't just knock off what's there. That's for the next crop and the crop after. It's a build-up over time. I understand that there were trials to show that chemical destruction increases topsoil mineral N levels. The only trial is that trial was done by somebody who strongly supports herbicides. So not sure about that one. I like mechanical destruction because it gives less of a quick fix, but it gives you a massive increase over time. And also because in the spring, certainly on spring crops, as you crimp it down, you've got a lovely covering for the soil. So when we have those dry springs, you've got some moisture held in. Work really well. The last 2 years, we haven't stopped bloody raining all. But as I say, don't automatically look at the figures. Just told you that one. Immensely important. This is back to that photosynthesis, carbon, build up. Calcium, cell strength and yield. It's a bit like the bricks in a house. You've got lots and lots of bricks, you'll have a big house, and you might even be able to put another floor on. So, immensely important. It is my belief, and it took me probably 3 years before Mike actually said you might have a point here, especially in this part of the world. It is my belief that some of the modern varieties really struggle to take up the amount of calcium that they need in the growing season, regardless of what's underneath them. And I think, personally, that's one of the reasons why we can't attain the yields that our seed suppliers are telling us that we should be getting to. So we need to look at calcium in a big way on the farm. You all need to look at this. Why is it that strawberry farmers, other fruit farmers, top fruit farmers, they all spray calcium once or twice a week, and we don't? No, I'm not suggesting you go out there and spray it once or twice a week. That's not going to happen. But they spray foliar calcium on, and we don't. That doesn't make sense, and it could be a major answer to several of our problems. Every time I have a leaf test done on a crop that's got yellow rust, calcium is low. So when I said earlier on, why is something happening? That could be one of the reasons. Boron. The number of times we have leaf tests and all sorts of tests in this group, and we find boron's low. It's something we struggle to get to the right levels. It doesn't matter what we chuck on, we don't seem to get it into the leaf. We need to work on this. It aids calcium uptake with silicon. Calcium, boron and silicon are a big trio. They work together. They must be there all together. It aids calcium uptake. It moves phosphorus around the plant. Yes, phosphorus is important when the seed goes in to create root, but it's important all the way through the plant's life. It's energy. It's a bit like saying I don't need using a torch when you first switch it on, then taking a battery out of it. It won't work. You've got to keep adding phosphorus in as the energy because it burns it up. You have your dinner every day. The plant needs it on a regular basis. And then not only that, the boron translocates the sugars. When the sugars are made in the leaf, it translocates them down to the root so that they can chuck them out in the root or wherever it's needed. If you've got a bricks meter and you do your bricks in the afternoon, and then you go back to the same place and you do a bricks test first thing in the morning, if the bricks is the same level, you've got a boron deficiency because it's not moving the sugars away from the leaf. Magnesium, we know it's the centre of the chloroplast. That's the centre of the photosynthesis. Many other things, but that's its main job. Phosphorus is the energy. Silicon, I can do a talk all that on its own. Most people who know me, I am a silicon nut. It's a calcium synergist. It works in the cells. Funny enough, one can replace the other. It works both ways, which again means if you've got calcium at a good high level, you will fight off pest and disease. But certainly with silicon in there, once it brings the calcium into the plant, if you've brought it in as silicon dioxide, it converts NO3 in the sap into protein. Ergo, you're losing a food source for pest and disease. Another way of reducing pest and disease. The calcium also increases the waxy layer on the plant, so the pest and disease can't get in the first place. I love it when these expensive chemicals come out and they say, oh yes, it strips the wax off the leaf so it can get in. Honestly, we do take some notice of some crap, we really do. Silicon is probably the major point, the central point for anybody who doesn't want to use fungicides. You've got to get your head around that one. Potassium silicate is the one to use. Don't use monosilicic acid or monosilicic acid or orthosilicic acid because, which is the same thing, they will kill all your beneficials. That's how I made my name in New Zealand, because they had a major problem with two-spotted mite. I used that, it completely took them out. It took the aphids out, took the woolly aphid out, it took the blood, it cleaned them up perfectly, but there was nothing else there. You don't want to do that because it will take all of your beneficials out. So only use potassium silicate, and only use potassium silicate with citric acid. And don't do it until you've spoken with somebody who knows how to do it, otherwise you will have a sprayer full of Colgate. You must get it right, but if you get it right, oh, it's worth its weight in gold to you. Interesting point, this was just on maize, and it was only because it was sat on my desk at the time. This, you could say a very similar thing for the first few weeks of wheat in the spring when the soil gets to 9 degrees. Maize, it needs 7, 2 and 10. 7 nitrogen, 2 phosphorus, 10 potassium. So, and all the others, of course, wants everything in balance. So why is it when we look at increasing yield, we only ever look at one thing? We look at nitrogen. So basically all we do, if we say, well, let's go on, let's give it a go, let's take this to 10, that's got to go up, that's got to go up, and all the micronutrients. Keep the balance. Don't forget availability. I've mentioned that I don't think plants can take up calcium fast enough. If you're in a high calcium area, right here. Oh, right. I noticed nobody did that to you. That's what comes of being in charge. When you're in a high calcium area, it's highly likely that your plants are struggling to take any calcium up. Now, bearing in mind that the calcium is the trucker of all minerals, and the boron is a steering wheel, that's Gary Zimmer, you realise that if you reduce the input of the calcium, you're reducing the input of all the other stuff that you need. So it's a lose-lose situation, which is why you've got to start looking at a foliar. But we'll go in, and then of course you fall back onto the fulvic acid. Doesn't matter what you use on the leaf. There's some very good ones. That's why I joined Aiva, because the Danish stuff was wonderful. There's a whole load of stuff. If you put fulvic acid with your foliar, it will work so much better. And of course, the one we use is Citadel, and because Citadel has got a amino acid N in it, we generally can greatly reduce the amount of N we use. But I'll leave that one because Tim's got that one in his talk. So don't just because it's in the soil underneath you, don't assume that the plant can get it. This is why leaf tests, sap tests, must go to. Yep, there's a nutrient one, said that, done that. Urea. Over the past generation, 2 generations, we have watched science, and I'm a huge believer in science. I haven't got a religious bone in my body, so I'm a science-based person. But unfortunately, science has been taken over by the big boys, by the multinationals. So you do have to look at where the work comes from these days, which is a bloody shame. But the number of things we've put onto the soil that has done nothing but wreck them, and now we're going to start using chemical inhibitors. No, that's my opinion, no way. Why would I use a chemical inhibitor? I would use less N, I would put a fulvic acid with it. If you put fulvic acid with N, you can use a third less N, and still get the same results. And yes, I do believe it's a third. I don't go down by 10, 20 or 30. It's a third. It happens, works so well for me. I know where it is. So you can reduce the amount of N you put it on in 3 or 4 times rather than 1. And then you use things like humic acid, which is a buffer, which will hold the N in place. So again, that's aiding, so it's not inhibiting, but it's just holding it there for that when it's needed. And also, I'm just hearing that wood vinegar may be an option there, a natural option to help things there. Not quite sure I understand that one, but I'm looking forward to seeing the information. So watch with interest. Wood vinegar may be a very, very good inhibitor from what we're hearing. Urea as a foliar is brilliant. If you're looking, if you're going to start off, always start off with ammonium sulfate in the spring. Sulfur is so important. Sulfur actually kicks off photosynthesis. It's not involved in the actual process, but without it to start with, it don't get going. So ammonium sulfate is the perfect place to start. Then you can go through different ends, but at the end, if you're looking for a protein, and I don't mean this is a cheat, spraying it on at the last minute so it goes into the barn, but if you use urea, melt it down. Is it 25 kilograms in 1,000 litres of water gives you a 5% solution? I think it is. You'd have to check that. I think that is right. And then, of course, people say, well, it burns. Not if you do it in the dark. I've got several farmers who put it on at night, and on its own, doesn't burn. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that. Like everything else I say, it needs to be tested, small areas. But I've got farmers who do the whole farm in that system, and it doesn't burn. What you can do, of course, is start to think, well, all right, I'm going to put that in on, what do I need? You need something like Citadel or something where it's got humic and fulvic in there. You need a micronutrients in there so that you start to break it down into protein. It's no good putting something that will go into protein there. You need to break it down into protein. So manganese, silicon as silicon dioxide needs to be there. Citric acid, you mostly know about that. All plants produce citric acid naturally, some more than others. They know what it is, they know how to use it. They're happy with it, so it's a brilliant thing to use. The only thing is, as I said earlier on, if you can use citric acid to break down potassium silicate, because it breaks it down into potassium citrate and silicon dioxide, which doesn't kill everything before it goes in, then you need to know how to do it. But if you get it right, everything goes in there. Have some patience if you're doing it. A lot of people, if they have any problems, they'll do everything you're supposed to and say, oh, I'm still having problems because they're chucking stuff in too quick. Put it in and take your time. Put that in and then get everything else ready while that's mixing. I'll leave that one for Tim, Psalms without toxic chemicals. Even Jonathan Lundgren, the American who authorised all the seed drenches in America, is now going around and apologising for that. He said, it's a con, don't do it. It was never, by the time, you look quizzical there, by the time the disease has arrived, the bacteria has eaten the chemical. So it isn't even there. So you never need it in the first place. And also, again, Tim will show you that if you use clean seed, we're lucky enough to have a liquid applicator. So we put all sorts of, so we put nutrition down there, we put microbial life. So to say we use clean seed is a bit disingenuous. So we put lots of stuff down there, but the seed is clean and we get quicker germination, stronger germination. So the plants come up quicker, they grow quicker, and you get a bigger root mass because they're not held back. Then we're not killing the life that the plant expects to be there. Liquid applicator, probably the best investment a farm can make. I would strongly suggest, and nothing to do with me, but Trevor Tappin, ITT. I know somebody who's just bought a gigantic drill. It's a monumental, it's an amazing piece of kit with a liquid applicator on, and he's already thinking about getting it changed to a Trevor Tappin system with the, thank you, peristaltic pump, because it means he can put through. When Tim put a heater onto his system, he brews what basically looks like thin Marmite, and it still goes through the system, doesn't block up. So very expensive, save until you can have one, because quite frankly, otherwise it'll drive you nuts. Never applied, said that one. Understand humates, hugely important. Done that one. Farmers can be part of the solution to the problem of climate change if you believe in that sort of thing. If you don't, it doesn't matter, because if you use the carbon in the air, the nitrogen in the air, balanced fertilisation, you will get more money onto your bank account. So whether you want to save the planet or not, surely that's important. Just a quick mention of brewing. Not going to go into this now because again that's a talk on its own. But if you can compost your own materials and put it in there, it's just a no-brainer. You can repopulate your soils. You can help a poor soil get better quicker. If you don't want to brew, you can go and talk to people at Aiva because they do various bits and bobs that you can brew up all on your own and get it in there. My favourite was Consortium because it worked exceptionally well. So, yeah, you can either brew up or you can use it out of the tub. If you do buy proprietary products, always use them out of the tub to start with. Convince yourself they work and then brew. Don't go straight for brewing of products out of a tub, simply because if you brew it and it doesn't work, you don't know whether it was your brewing technique or the stuff out the tub that's not working. Get yourself something that works, then look at the economics. That's the same on everything. I used to be the same when I was asked to trial chemicals. This is a long time ago when I did that sort of thing. I always used to come in, I used to bring them in, and I'd use them twice rate, half rate, normal rate, and zero. Guess which one always gave me the best results? Actually, not entirely true, because one product called Tallet came out, and I did that. It just didn't do anything against botrytis. This was on horticultural crops. So I put a silicon-based wetting agent in with it, and it was brilliant. I thought, Christ, that works well. And I just thought, I wonder. So I tried the silicon-based wetting all on its own, and guess what? That worked. So I didn't need the chemical. All I needed was a wetting agent. And I think it was Mike that told me some of these new expensive chemicals that you've got around now have got 15 wetting agents in them? And it's quite more often. I was at the retirement. There was a meeting, one of the head chemists at Certis was leaving, and he'd heard about what I was doing with silicon and using it as a fungicide. And he came up and we started talking about it. He started to smile. He said, I've got to be honest. He says, most of the time, and he did use the word most of the time, it is the wetting agent that does the work, not the chemical. There you go. You can take that one home with you. So learn how to repopulate your soils. Brilliant way of doing it. And again, in the ear complex, we use Bacillus subtilis and orange oil. In the ear complex against fusarium. We get almost zero fusarium and practically no other disease. We use chemicals, we get anything like 28 to 50% fusarium. And here's another one you can take home with you. Sorry. Fusarium, 20, 30 years ago, wasn't a problem to you. It's come because you've got so used to using the wrong chemicals at the wrong time that the fusarium is taken over and you've become a problem. And you've got another bugger on the line at the moment, because wherever I'm going on farms, I'm finding Phytophthora in the roots. Now, when I first joined Aiva, I said, oh God, there's Phytophthora here. Mike, who I do consider one of the top agronomists in the country, said, what the hell's Phytophthora? Now, obviously, if you were a strawberry grower, potato grower, it's what you live with. But be careful, because it's coming after you. If you get the roots out the ground, and you get the root, you always get the root, because if you pull it and it's springy, it shows you've got good enough boron there. So I pulled it, and basically the outer part of the root will come across from the inner part. And that's Phytophthora. Phytophthora is ancient Greek for plant destroyer. It destroys more plants than any other disease in the world. And it is coming after your wheat. That's because of the way that you put in the chemicals in the ground. That'll be your next fusarium. Whereas if you go down this route, it won't, because most of these things eat Phytophthora and Pythium. So again, you'll stop a problem before you even know what it is.